Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the way to work this morning, we drove past the Centrelink offices in Hobart, and as it is with Centrelink offices right around the country, the queue is stretching all the way down Barrack Street. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was deeply, deeply confronting, and these are Tasmanians who a week ago were employed, who maybe a month ago thought their jobs were secure and they were making plans for the future. We are talking about tens of thousands of our fellow Tasmanians. It reinforces the vital need for us all to work together, that we are all in this together, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is my hope that in some ways this pandemic is bringing people closer together from a safe physical distance. I'm seeing all sorts of random acts of kindness. When you walk down the street, people hold your eyes and they look at you, and there's that sense of human connection, because we can't touch each other anymore for a little while, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's so shocking. I think that's where we all are, Madam Speaker. It happened so fast, so ruthlessly, and here we are, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, of course, the Greens will be supporting these 4 bills that came through that are tabled urgently today for debate. I'll just make a few comments on each of them as a whole and ask a few questions of the Minister on the way through. Mr O'Byrne is absolutely right. What this situation brings home to us is the vital importance of government in keeping people safe, in protecting their health and well-being. After decades of rampant conservatism and neoliberalism undermining funding in our public services and public institutions and telling us that the market will take care of everything, here we are, turning to governments of all political stripes, in some cases desperately turning to them for a sense of security and hope for the future. And it is a little bit like, Madam Deputy Speaker, socialism has sashayed back into the room, because now we're in a situation where government is having to invest in keeping people safe, in doing what it can to look after businesses, to keep businesses in hibernation until we get through this. And I don't believe Parliament has ever before dealt with so many uncertainties at every layer of every aspect of our economy and society and our democracy. We are dealing with profound uncertainty. It requires of us all to work closely together, to respect each other, to engage in those random acts of kindness, and to keep that social connection going. I've read things about landlords cutting their rents by 20%. I've read many stories of people paying it forward to their favourite small business. I was talking to the owner of the Lansdowne Cafe the other day, and one of his regular customers, who's a climate scientist, rang him up and said, "Look, I can't come in for a while, but I love your breakfasts. Could you please give me your bank account so I can deposit the cost of my breakfast every morning with your cafe?" Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it was Mr Shelton in this place the other day who said, this pandemic is making good people better and bad people worse. Madam Deputy Speaker, as a Parliament, I sense that we are all determined not to leave any Tasmanian behind in the weeks and unknown months ahead. I believe that the social contract between the government and the people, nationally and here, is being rewritten. Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be a need for much more openness and transparency as we go forward. We will need to remove political acrimony and point scoring from everything that we do. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will need to be constantly reminding ourselves of the critical value of our public servants, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know that across agencies many people are working from home and that presents its own challenges and it will impact on productivity. Madam Deputy Speaker, and constantly throughout the day I and I'm sure many Tasmanians think about the people who are working in our health system. They're a high-risk group of people, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we owe them the most enormous debt of gratitude. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can't, before I go on to the detail of the bill, I cannot in all conscience stand here and not, thanks Fiona, and not raise the issue of the differences in the way some employers have treated their loyal staff. For 40 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Farrell family has done very well off Tasmania. It has made billions and billions of dollars out of this island. It's taken money out of the pockets of some of our poorest people, and it has corrupted our democracy, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the image I cannot get out of my mind after yesterday is the picture of Greg Farrell before the last state election with federal group employees standing behind him while he was seeking to coerce people to vote a particular way, including his own staff, and saying that their jobs were threatened by the policies of the Labor Party and the Greens. And yesterday at midday, what did they do? Bang on the knock. When the restrictions come in, federal group sacked 1,500 Tasmanians. This is a family that, according to the BRW rich list, Madam Deputy Speaker, is worth around $745 million. And they sacked those people who stood by them before the last election straight away, 12 o'clock, on the knocker, 1,500 jobs gone. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is only one word for that: betrayal. Absolute betrayal of those employees and of this island and its people. And to be honest, I wish the Farrells would just bugger off back to Sydney. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we're dealing with 4 pieces of legislation today, and I too want to thank the Treasury and Finance officials for our briefing yesterday. It was a very concise briefing, very straight talking, and this is our understanding of bills that we only saw themselves this morning, which of course as responsible legislators in here makes us a bit uneasy, but these are times when everyone's feeling terribly uneasy. So the first of the Treasury and Finance bills that we're taking through today is the Supplementary Appropriation Bill, which gives the capacity for government to maintain expenditure and extra expenditure until June. It covers the State of the State announcements of $1.4 million. It provides the funding for the first economic stimulus announcement, and that is funding in hard money, if you like, of $18.5 million out of a total stimulus package of $420 million, which makes it clear that a large part of the first stimulus is low interest loans, Madam Deputy Speaker. Businesses are going to need a lot more than that, Madam Deputy Speaker, in order to come out of hibernation with any chance of restarting. And we do look forward to the second set of stimulus measures, and I would simply encourage the Premier and the Minister to remember that we're going to be dealing with people who are at risk of homelessness. We're going to be dealing with people who are elderly and living alone in the community, who may be extremely isolated. We need to respond to people living with disability independently in the community who are heavily dependent on a carer workforce. And we already know there's impacts as a consequence of COVID-19 transmission prevention measures on our care workers and some of the restrictions that are being put in place in order to protect their health and wellbeing. So there'll need to be a suite of socially protective measures in the second stimulus package. And in passing, I'll just say the Commonwealth Government missed a real opportunity yesterday, the Morrison government, in not providing for a living wage. We're now in a situation, and that's why there are queues outside Centrelink, for heaven's sake. We're now in a situation where we're treating everyone as a country as a job seeker, when really what they are job waiters. They're waiting for things to return to some semblance of normality. And of course, we don't know when that will be. But if ever there was an argument for a living wage, for a universal basic income, it is here and it is now, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we've had an acknowledgement from the Commonwealth that New Start is unlivable, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we do need to have the conversation about a living wage for people. This first bill makes an extra allocation to Finance General of $180 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And we acknowledge that own state revenues will be impacted, that there will be declines, and in fact in some cases massive declines of revenue for conveyancing, stamp duty, and there may need to be provisions made by government for the relief of some of those other duties and fees. We've seen the West Australian government move to put a freeze on payments such as rates, electricity, registration costs. These are measures that will have to be adopted down here, Madam Deputy Speaker. We acknowledge that the Treasurer's reserve will decline unless it's topped up, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that it is my understanding that the state's cash position is pretty good now, but it will decline in the months and in fact years ahead, because these financial impacts will be cumulative. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the second, and I acknowledge that the extra provision in this legislation of $150 million to Finance General will help government respond to unforeseen costs that come about as a result of this pandemic and the government's need to respond to keep people safe. The second bill is the supply bill number 1, and I have a few questions for the Minister relating to the appropriations. So this is the bill that makes sure that Services can continue to operate between 1 July and the end of this year because we will not have a state budget in June as originally projected. This has appropriations to agencies that, and I'm sure there's a very straightforward explanation for this minister, but we did have the time this morning to have a look at the forward estimates for the agencies for 2021 as they were in the last budget and the appropriation in this supply bill. And there are some agencies where you can see that the appropriation for the next 6 months of operation is not 50% of their forward estimates allocation, and there's some really concerning ones in here. Family violence, for example, in the Department of Communities Tasmania, the original allocation across the forward estimates was $8.87 million, and the unit is, well, I hope the Minister will explain why only 26% of the forward estimates allocation for family violence is being covered in this supply bill. We're seeing some figures that work the other way. For example, in housing, disability and community development, there's 81% of the allocation provided for in the second half of this year. But veterans, for example, have been allocated only 16% of their full year's provision, an extra 72% for obvious reasons for Finance General. The health budget just sits right on 50%, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's very clear to us all that the health budget will continue to grow over the course of the next year at least. I do wonder why, of all the agencies in government, all the divisions within agencies, the Department of Resources in State Growth is receiving 93% of its allocation in the second half of this year, the first half of the next financial year. The original allocation for resources was $20,303,000, and they're being provided with $18,804,000 under this supply bill, and that seems an extraordinarily generous provision in a time of pandemic, when we need to be sure that we don't leave anyone behind, and we are sure to have, for example, a freeze on evictions in place and a rent freeze so that people aren't facing spikes in their rental costs. Yet this supply bill gives resources in the Tasmanian government 93% of its full year allocation. We have the department, the racing division in government being given 91% of its full year allocation, which might be easily explainable by the way the grant money rolls out the door. That's fine. Is that the same explanation for resources? I look forward to your response. The heritage unit in Dipipwe is receiving 135% of its full year allocation, so across the forward estimates, and I think we need to understand why heritage is receiving the best part of another $2 million, and in the first half of this year. I see that there's an understanding that there'll be impacts on education and training in state growth, with 58% of its full year forward estimates allocation provided for in this supply bill. So I guess you know, Minister, as you're aware, we're all in here working very cooperatively and taking much on trust, as we have to. but some of those numbers are a little bit, well, it's a bit hard to fathom why the supplementary, why the supply bill has some of the allocations that it does. The second supply bill provides for the operation of the House of Assembly, the Integrity Commission, Legislative Council, LegGen, Office of the DPP and Office of the Governor, so that we can keep those vital institutions of government and democracy functioning, Madam Deputy Speaker. And of course the final bill is the legislation that extends the first homeowners grant for 2 years, provides payroll tax relief to hospitality and seafood sectors, and a payroll tax rebate. It also, this bill gives power to the Commissioner of State Revenue to do whatever is necessary to implement an order by the Minister. And again, we're seeing all sorts of shifts of responsibility and power, Madam Deputy Speaker, in this very, very difficult period. So our questions relate primarily to Supply Bill number 1 and why the decisions have been made in the way that they have. And I want to just close by making an observation about what are essential services, Madam Deputy Speaker. We can glean from the Premier's response to questions this morning that Tasmania is likely to face more severe measures, and some of those measures will be much stronger stay-at-home messaging for the broader population. We've already seen the closure of pubs and clubs and restaurants and other hospitality ventures. Interstate, for example, or in overseas jurisdictions where they've gone into general lockdown, businesses that are regarded as essential services include pharmacies and supermarkets. Now, obviously, there is a level of risk, again, associated with going into a supermarket during a time of pandemic, and I do trust that the supermarket companies will manage those risks in order to keep people safe and well. I did want to give a shout out to the importance, I know this is going to sound a bit hippie, but nurseries are really important, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're going into a period of social dislocation and disconnection, and many people will be spending a lot more time at home. And for mental health and well-being, the capacity to spend time in your own garden and potentially grow your own food will be really important. And in fact, I just got a text from my best girlfriend in the world, who was out this morning, and she's a great gardener, and she's out this morning at one of the big chains and said all the seedlings are nearly gone. So what's happening is that people are worried, first of all, about food security, so they're thinking about planting gardens, but people are also starting to become aware that perhaps in modern life we're a bit too dependent on food that's imported or bought in or arrives with an Uber driver. So we're seeing people in Tasmania go to nurseries. I'm sure that many nurseries will report this. I was at the nursery on the weekend. They said they're doing a roaring trade, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we're likely to see that there'll be a real need for businesses like nurseries to stay open to some extent so that they can be part of that social resilience and mental health and wellbeing protections that we put in place as a society. So I would ask in those conversations about what is an essential service, that we think outside the box a little bit, because we're about to go into winter here in Tasmania, and there'll be people spending a lot more time indoors, and as we know, that comes with potential risk for people, women in violent relationships or children in dysfunctional homes. So we need to have all sorts of protective measures in place for those Tasmanians. But we do need to think about, all connecting with each other somehow or another over the dark winter months, because this is going to be the darkest winter in Tasmania's history, Madam Speaker. And in closing, I'd like to thank the Minister for doing his best under really difficult circumstances to get a pretty comprehensive package of appropriation, supply and taxation amendments legislation together, and to working with us in good faith on this, and simply to encourage government and the Premier, given that there's uncertainty about when and how Parliament will sit in the immediate future. I think there's much more scope here for openness and trust. If, it's a bit like what Mr O'Byrne said, isn't this unprecedented times we're talking about trusting each other? And who'd have thought yesterday I'd look into the Premier's eyes for solace and comfort, but here we are.
You give him strength to carry on.
But I would encourage government to just be more inclusive here. If there's big decisions that are being made and you want political backing, if you want to send that message to the community that we're all working together, please give us a call. I think that'll be really important, because there's not going to be much accountability mechanism in place through this place, and a decent government won't exploit that. And I don't think in these circumstances that this government will exploit that, but it would be good to have some structures in place to ensure we keep talking to each other in the best interests of the Tasmanian people who elected us to serve them, to look after them when they need to be looked after, and to work in their best interests, which I am certain every member of this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, is absolutely, unreservedly determined to do.